Hello everyone. In this lecture, we are going to learn about Morgenthau's 6 principles of political realism. Morgenthau is the chief exponent of political realism. That's why he is also known by father of political realism. And his most landmark book, Politics Among Nations: A Struggle for Power and Peace, acted as a source of huge impact on the development of international politics. He rejects the idealist approach to the study of IR and describes international politics is all about struggle for power among nations. His theory is known as realism or realist theory because it is basically concerned with the human nature, and he presents the human nature, a pessimistic view of human nature which based on self-centered, self-regarding and self-interested, and he compares human nature with the nations. After all, nations is also governed by a leader who leads the nations, and in order to survive in international system, a nation always tries to maintain and secure its national interest. And he explained 6 principles of realist theory. This together constitute the essence of his political realism. So, the first principle of political realism holds that politics, like society in general, is governed by objective laws that have their roots in human nature. So, what he says is that international politics is also governed by objective laws which have their roots in human nature. So, like society in general, there are certain objective laws which govern the society that have their roots in human nature, and again international politics is also governed by that certain objective laws which derive its sources from the human nature. So a rational theory of politics and international relations can be based on these laws. So that is the first principle. Now, the second principle: the key to understanding international politics is the concept of interest defined in terms of power. This principle holds that nations always define and act for securing their national interest by means of power. Interest defined in terms of power is the objective. It's a universal objective, because what realist thinkers argues is that international politics is all about anarchy. Anarchy means absence of all government. So in order to survive in international system, you have to increase your power. So in order to secure your national security, you have to increase your power. You have to pursue the power. So that's why interest defined in terms of power, and statesmen or leader think and act in terms of national interest defined as power. We can anticipate the steps of statesmen, past, present and future. Statesman or the leader have to think and act in terms of national interest, because he have to secure his nation's territory, populations. So how do he secure his nations and territory? With the help of power, by pursuing power, and by looking at the foreign policies or actions which has been taken by the statesman or the leader. We can also anticipate, or we can also analyze statesmen's past, present and future. So that's why interest defined in terms of power is the objective law which govern the international politics. Third principle: national interest is always dynamic. Political realism believes in the universal validity of the concept of interest defined in terms of power. So we came to know that, like, interest defined in terms of power is the universal validity concept which is given by the Morgenthau. So that is the objective laws. Universal validity of the concept of interest defined in terms of power is objective laws, and policies actions of nations are always governed by the national interest. But national interest, all the states always want to secure, always want to pursue, always want to secure its national interest or national security through the means of power. But this national interest is not a static, it is a dynamic, it is changing. It changes according to the time and situation, political and social environment. It changes with political and social environment. And that's why the national power, likewise, the national power is also dynamic, and it changes with the changes in environment in which it operates for securing national interest. In order to secure the national interest, it changes according to the time and situation. For example, in during the Cold War period, India became the member of the non-alignment movement because most of the developing countries do not want to ally with USSR and USA. So that's why they formed the separate non-alignment policies. But after what happened, like Cold World War period, so the relevance of NAM was not that much, which were earlier in the Cold War period. In that, after the Cold War period, India adopted the new foreign policy, so that is look east policy. So now, like India have like started to adopt new foreign policy, that is East Act policy. Okay, East Act policy. So that is how, like, national interest of the particular nations always changes according to the time and situation and the political environment. It is not a static, but it is a dynamic, or it is a changing. Though always all the countries always want to pursue national interest, but it is not a static, it is a dynamic. Fourth principle: universal moral principles do not guide state behavior, though state behavior will certainly have moral ethical implications. So state have their own moral principles, though state have their own moral principles, but and well, taking any kind of foreign policy, okay, so the states are not governed by universal moral principles. And that's why realism believes that states are not expected to observe the same standards of morality as are binding upon and observed by men. So moral principles, like you have justice, you have human rights, human world peace, so these are the universal principles. But while acting or while interacting with other countries, okay, while taking any kind of foreign policies, so these universal principles cannot guide the nation. So that is like the say fourth principle. Now fifth principle, fourth and fifth principles are the similar principle, which basically focuses on the moral aspirations or moral principles. uh, Difference between moral aspirations of nation and universal moral principles. So I've already told you, like, there is no universal agreed set of moral principles. According to Morgenthau, there is no any universal agreed set of moral principles. Moral principles cannot become the foreign policy of the particular nations, because what Morgenthau argues is that they always want to secure national interest. Okay, so in order to national interest, secure your national interest or your territory or your population, you have to pursue a power. So what he argues is that each nation tries to cover its national interest on the clock of several moral principles. So it is like each state tried to cover its national interests through the moral principles. For example, US anti-terror policy is governed by its own national interest and not really based on the concept of making the world safe for freedom and democracy. So the initiative which has been taken by the United States against the terrorism, in order to eliminate the terrorism from the world, so it is all about the national interest of the United States, because it is not really based on the concept of making the world safe for freedom and democracy. So national interest differs from one state to another states. Okay, so the United States is following, or they are guided by the moral principles, that is human right violations. Okay, so terrorists are killing large number of people, so they are violating the human rights. So but USA, which they are taking such kind of initiative, it is all about their national interest. It is not about making or bringing any kind of freedom or democracy in the world. So that's why a foreign policy is always based on national interest and national power, and it is not based on the morality. So moral laws cannot be applicable to the particular states. Okay, so that is the fifth principle. Now the sixth principle. Morgenthau presents the autonomous sphere of the international politics. So, political realism has its own autonomous sphere. It is different from other idealistic or legalistic or moralistic approach, and because it is basically concerned with the national interest defined in terms of power as its sole concerns, and political realism is not concerned with the legalistic, which basically focuses on legal aspect, and moralistic moral they focuses on moral aspect like economic, they focuses on the wealth. So likewise political realism focuses on the politics. It is concerned with or seek to study the struggle for power among nations, in which every nation strives to maintain or increase its power. So international system, each nations always want to increase or maintain its power in the international system. So that's why it's all about struggle for power among nations. Thus political realism has its distinctive approach, and subject matter stands for political standards and believes in the autonomy of international politics. It is different from the other approaches, and it has its own sphere. That's why it presents the autonomy of autonomous spheres of political international politics. So this is the six principles. Now the summary. Political realism regards international politics as struggle for power among nations, whereby each nation strives to secure its national interest. It seeks to build a national and rational and realistic theory of international politics, and for this regards the concept of interest defined as power as the benchmark. It emphasizes the study of factors and consequences of political policies and gives secondary importance to the motives in international relations. It refuses to use universal moral principles for judging state actions and instead advocates dependence on prudence for analyzing policies and facts of international politics. Foreign policy of each nation is really based on national interest and not upon moral principles. So there are also some of the criticism like it neither fully empirical nor fully logical. It presents a partial approach because it only focuses on the national security. It's unscientific, guilty of power monism, because Morgenthau always um, give more emphasis to the pursuit of power, seeking of power, and on the ground, like it is very difficult to evaluate national power and national interest. It is wrong to project the superiority of national interest over morality. So certain states are also governed by the some kind of morality, but this theory highly criticized about the moral principles. Universal moral principles cannot be applied to the state. So these all are the criticism which has been given by number of international scholars. Okay, so this is all about six principles of Morgenthau. Thank you so much.